Today we look at House Bill 5 and its attempt to favor one view over another in light of the history of religious diversity and First Amendment freedom in America. Welcome to Culture Shift, the Barry Farah Show. We are living in an American culture that has shifted from tolerant to cancel culture, from decent to rude, from optimistic to cynical, and from relatively safe to increasingly violent. But it's not too late. I hope to equip you with a historical framework applied to current events so you can lead and get America back on track for good. Hey, welcome back to the Barry Farah Show, Culture Shift. It's my passion to invest time and energy in your success, and that success depends on your freedom. As I've addressed in earlier episodes, one of the fundamental freedom pillars is the freedom of religion, enshrined in the First Amendment. You have the freedom to believe in accordance with any sacred book. You can order your life around the Bible or the Torah or the Pali Canon teachings of Buddha. This freedom is the reason for the founding of the United States. It's why those guys first got over here. This first among first freedoms would be largely compromised, though, if House Bill 5 becomes law. Americans have the freedom to hold a traditional Judeo-Christian view. Those traditional views related to men and women are widely believed. However, in addition, America respects other religious views in our diverse nation, such as those held by the modern lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer community. All communities deserve the freedom to believe according to their conscience without fear of government prosecution. And in addition to believing what they want to believe, all communities of belief are granted the freedom to exercise their religion freely. And in that same First Amendment, all communities are provided the freedom of speech. They can all speak their mind and think whatever they want to think. And in a peaceable manner, no one should be discriminated against in society. But H.R. 5 is not consistent with that belief. H.R. 5 actually discriminates against Christians and Jews and many other religious faiths. So let's quickly review our founding. The founders of America agreed that to build a democratic republic, it would require a virtuous people. If you expect people to largely govern themselves, they need to have some moral bearing. And the founders at the time believed that the source of virtue comes from a belief in God, or what we call faith. And faith is not possible without freedom because it can't be coerced. At the time of the writing of the Constitution, the freedom to believe was expressed from the perspective of the role of the federal government. So from the perspective of federal government, religious freedom would be protected. The free exercise of religion would be protected as well. But there would be no official church sponsored by the federal government. Now, as we take a moment to dive into H.R. 5, you're going to find that all three of these would be violated. So let's review the freedom for just a minute from a social science perspective. Freedom is that state of being free while not using your freedom to impose restrictions on other people's freedom. Freedom is when there's no coercion. When there's freedom, you're not bullied to get on your knees. There's no restriction. When there's freedom, you can believe what you want. You can worship in accordance with your beliefs and assemble with whom you choose. There's no censorship. When there's freedom, you're not forced into one lane of thought or canceled because you disagree. You can promote your beliefs without fear. H.R. 5 basically desecrates this freedom. It does a search and replace to the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and wherever you find sex in that act, it adds sexual orientation and gender identity. And they define gender identity as such. It means the gender-related identity, appearance, mannerisms, or other gender-related characteristics of an individual, regardless of the individual's designated sex at birth. And to make sure there's no loophole where you might think differently, it does away with the Religious Freedom Restoration Act of 1993. So according to the bill's sponsors, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer LGBTQ people are currently discriminated against. The authors of this bill lay out their complaints in Section 2. It's called the Finding and Purpose section. According to them, nearly one half of same-sex couples encounter adverse differential treatment when they're seeking housing for the elderly, when they're seeking elder housing. Transgender people have 50% of the home ownership rate of everyone else. About 1 in 5 transgender people experience homelessness. The LGBTQ people find it harder to get credit, like a mortgage, because of their sexual orientation or their gender identity. Another complaint is that the LGBTQ people, especially transgender people, are at a higher risk of poverty compared with other groups of people. And the poverty rate for other older lesbians is twice that of older heterosexual couples. Attorneys, according to them, discriminate against the LGBTQ community when they're making selection for their jury. And finally, many child-placing agencies refuse to serve same-sex couples and LGBTQ individuals. So according to the authors of this bill, it also sends a message about LGBTQ people to children and youth and the child welfare system about who is and who is not considered fit to be a good parent. And there are about twice as many LGBTQ youth in the foster care system as heterosexual young people. The LGBTQ youth in foster care have a higher rate of hospitalization for emotional reasons than their non-LGBTQ peers. And they commit quite a bit more crime than their non-LGBTQ peers as well. So these young people, under the age of 16, are increasingly adopting this transgen lifestyle. They find themselves instantly popular when they do so. But there's books out already detailing the regret these now still young, but over 18-year-olds have. They no longer are fertile, and they wish they had waited at least until they were 18 or so before making this life-changing decision. Yet, according to the authors of this bill, the practice known as conversion therapy is a form of discrimination, and it harms the LGBTQ people by undermining their sense of self-worth, increasing suicide ideation and substance abuse, exacerbating the family conflict, and contributing to their second-class status. But the folks that are the proponents of it are saying, hey, we're just trying to counsel them and help them walk through being a young, really just old kid, a young adult, 15, 16, 17-year-old, and getting them through to the other side and then letting them think it through as an adult. Now, this new act, this bill, will be enforced by the powerful Department of Justice. They can use federal grand jury subpoena power to intervene for the benefit of the LGBTQ community. And they can do that on account of sexual orientation or gender identity related issues. For example, the bill prohibits an individual from being denied access to a shared facility, including a restroom, a locker room, or a dressing room, regardless of the biological sex they were born with. So in the bill language, some groups and individuals are specifically called out to comply with this act. It's any establishment that provides a good or a service or a program, including a store, a shopping center, an online retail or service provider, a salon, a bank, a gas station, a food bank, a service or a care center, a shelter, a travel agency. You get the idea. A funeral parlor, any establishment that provides health care, accounting, or legal services, and then all the transportation services are listed. So the act covers fairly extensively pretty much everything related to housing, employment, public accommodations, public facilities, credit, lending, serving on a jury, public education, and more. So when you make a distinction, in general terms, if people are law-abiding and meet the general requirements in a freedom-oriented society, there would be no discrimination against any group or individual in obtaining those goods to begin with. So we've got to stop and ask, why are we doing this? If forcing one group of individual rights at the exclusion of the others is in fact a form of discrimination, what's actually going on with H.R. 5? For example, what about the rights of biological women who believe their biological birth is their definitive female identity? What are their rights if they have no choice but to use a restroom with multiple stalls with a biological male who identifies as a woman? Or what if a trans man is involved in competing in women's sports? What does that do to the woman's sports? Though some deny that there's no link to trans-inclusive policies and safety, there are reports that reveal the opposite. I mean, just witness the Seattle man who undressed in a woman's locker room in what could be called quite the invasion of privacy. He was asked to leave, and the woman was very uncomfortable. How about the Washington Post reporting the sexual assault of a woman in a woman's bathroom in a Georgia school? I mean, critics of transgender access to restrooms and locker rooms is called a sticking point on trans policy, but it's really an invasion of privacy, and it really is a violation of the rights of those women who are comfortable being women. So how does the H.R. 5 Act threaten the traditional view of biological gender? Well, it's a direct threat to religious communities who ascribe to their beliefs within their organizations. What about any religious exemptions? Does the bill provide that? Well, no, it actually explicitly doesn't. In fact, in Section 1107, the bill says that the Religious Freedom Restoration Act of 1993 shall not provide a claim concerning or a defense to a claim under a covered title, or provide a basis for challenging the application or the enforcement of a covered title. So, it's pretty intense. For example, the largest religious belief in the United States is still the Christian faith. It includes acceptance of the Bible and its teachings. Most Christians who call themselves evangelicals believe that the Bible and its teachings are true and applicable today. This view includes the view that God created male and female in his image, and that there's a legitimate definition of marriage, and that definition is between one man and one woman. Now, this is obviously at odds with the LGBTQ community and their beliefs. Most people I know in the faith community don't have any problem working with and accepting the differences of belief and being respectful and courteous to those who have a non-biblical view of marriage. They don't discriminate against them in the non-sectarian jobs. For example, one of my friends, he knows my beliefs. We worked really closely together and very successfully together before I sold that company. He served as my senior executive VP. We're still friends. We still chat. And we hold each other in high regard. We have courteous conversations, even though we disagree on this point. The deletion of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, though, by H.R. 5, is really a direct assault on First Amendment rights for those who have that belief, protecting the free exercise of religion. Many small, privately held businesses and religious organizations, including churches and other nonprofits all over America, could be targeted by the tools that are given in H.R. 5 in its current form. This bill would make it illegal to operate your business according to your religious beliefs. You couldn't start your business in prayer. Do you remember Jack Phillips, the Colorado baker? So Jack happily sells pre-designed cakes to anyone, regardless of their sexual orientation or anything else. Any member of the LGBTQ community can walk into his store and be greeted friendly and with good service, and they can buy anything at the same price anybody else would pay for it that's in his case and has already been prepared. But then there's this other part of Jack's store, and it's his custom creative department. And it's an expression of his soul. It's his artwork. It's through baking and cake decorating. The pre-baked cakes are like an art gallery with paintings on the wall for sale, and Jack makes those cakes available to all. But the custom cakes, that's like if an artist got a request for a private commission to paint a particular person. Some artists don't paint nude portrayals of their customer. They say, I just don't do that. I'm a fully clothed artist, and I only paint people that are fully clothed. And that artist has the right to make that decision. That's possibly based on his religious belief or just his preference. In the same manner, Jack's custom cakes are Jack's custom artwork, and those are at his discretion. Jack's a Christian. I've actually met Jack. He's a humble, gentle guy. He has deeply held beliefs, though, and those are in the idea of traditional marriage between a man and a woman. As such, Jack's not comfortable and wouldn't feel he would be operating in good conscience to use his labor, his artwork, his craftsmanship to design and build a same-sex cake with symbols that celebrated same-sex marriage. That's just not for Jack. It's against his religious beliefs. Now, note, the gay couple that requested the cake that caused all of the flurry of lawsuits could have been purchased in a different way. They could have purchased a generic wedding cake from Jack, and they could have bought their own wedding topper with 2 men if they wanted to. Or they could have gone to a number of other bakers in the same community and ordered their custom artwork. Instead, they sued Jack, and that lawsuit was heard by the United States Supreme Court eventually. The Supreme Court ruled in Jack's favor. Yet, even after all of that, the LGBTQ community was not satisfied. They came after Jack again to harass him with novel lawsuits. H.R. 5 opens the door for every business and nonprofit to be harassed like Jack, and it weaponizes the Department of Justice to enforce the beliefs that are outlined in the bill. Here's the issue. It appears that the same-sex couple that sued Jack actually treated him differently than he treated them. He treated them respectfully. This couple could have expressed that same respect for Jack, and they could have gone down the street and bought a cake from one of the many other vendors that have no Christian foundation. Yet rather than respect Jack's First Amendment rights, they have harassed him to make an example of him, to punish him. That's what H.R. 5 could do to everyone. Here's another example. Hobby Lobby is a closely held private company owned by the Green family, who have very strong Christian religious beliefs. Within their rights related to health care, they didn't offer employer-provided plan to pay for abortions. You can disagree with them if you want to, and you can just choose not to shop at their stores if it really upsets you that they don't offer that. You can work for someone else if you're looking for a job, but to force them to do something against their long-held religious beliefs is not allowed. To fight for their belief, they risked the whole company. I've actually heard Steve Green tell the story, and it was a very painful decision for the family. They fought all the way up to the Supreme Court with the chance of being penalized in a backdated way all the way to the inception of that lawsuit, billions of dollars when it was all said and done. It's a dramatic story. But at the end, the landmark SCOTUS decision was in their favor. So it ruled that closely held for-profit companies are exempt from regulation that its owners religiously object to. This was in accordance with the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. It was the first time the SCOTUS recognized a for-profit company protection under the claim of religious belief. The SCOTUS limited, the Supreme Court, they limited this to closely held private companies. So you can't do this if you're a publicly held company because you've got public investors. But if you're a closely held company, it's family owned like this company, you can. Well, H.R. 5 eliminates that. It eliminates the Religious Freedom Restoration Act altogether. It opens the door for a one-way street on discrimination allegations. H.R. 5 denigrates the authority of the church. A church or a nonprofit that has these views shouldn't be discriminated against, but they should be protected. Churches, mosques, synagogues, and other religious institutions under H.R. 5 will be discriminated against. Their beliefs will not be respected. They'll be forced to hire someone just because they are LGBTQ and not because they meet the requirements of the job. Look at it this way. All organizations, and especially religious organizations, have a particular vision and mission, and they've got values. And in religious organizations, those values mean a lot. If you're directly opposed to the mission, and if you even want to speak out against the vision and the values of the organization, should the organization have to hire you still? And should they have to make you a candidate for their spokesperson? H.R. 5 would make that a likely requirement. To highlight the point, let's just look at a very recent situation. First week of February 2021. So National Cathedral is a pro-LGBTQ church. It's Episcopalian. And it had a guest speaker by the name of Max Lucado. Max was brought in through Zoom. It's at a pre-recorded message. He wasn't even physically there. And his sermon was about how to not be anxious in life. It had nothing to do with homosexuality or anything connected to the LGBTQ community. Max has sold over 120 million books. And most of his material is about the love of God and how gracious God is. But in 2004, Max Lucado wrote an article on the biblical idea of marriage. And his church preaches and believes that it's between one man and one woman. And he articulated that in that 2004 article. After he spoke through Zoom to the National Cathedral, the LGBTQ community went crazy. They protested loudly. They demanded an apology. Now, Max didn't make any mention of of anything related to LGBTQ ideas or anything in the Bible against homosexuality in this service or in that sermon. It wasn't even closely connected. Yet, the people that invited him felt that they were required to submit to this demand for an apology. So why did the folks who invited him, one of which is a very prominent gay bishop, why did they feel compelled to apologize? Well, Reverend Susan Russell, an LGBTQ advocate, explains. What he said, what Max said, in the pulpit had absolutely nothing to do with my objection. It was the fact that he was in the pulpit and what he represents. Now think about that. Even though Max Lucado is a man of goodwill and deep faith, according to her, it's unforgivable for him to be in the pulpit of any LGBTQ-supported Episcopal church. So, this is just a few weeks ago. One of the most popular evangelicals on the planet is discriminated against because of who he is. Not even what he said, but who he is. I mean, that's pretty strong. That's a very strong discrimination against him and a very strong exhortation for the whole church, that the one that is pro-LGBTQ, to make sure that never happens again. And you know what? It's their right. I respect their freedom to discriminate against Max Lucado. I'm simply opposed to their one-way discrimination. They should allow Max's church to have their traditional view on marriage and allow them to keep their pulpit and employment practices connected to their beliefs, just as National Cathedral was so swift and public to do about theirs. The issue is freedom and reciprocity. Expanding the 1964 law in the manner H.R. 5 onerously does is not a good idea. As James Madison said it, we fortify the rights of the people against the encroachments of the government. You know what made him say that? That's when he put together the finalization of the Bill of Rights. And in our Bill of Rights, it follows this brilliance of the thou shalt not concept of the Ten Commandments. This approach maximizes freedom. So rather than attempting to list all the things government can do, the document simply states what cannot be done. Congress shall make no law. The first part of the first right is the freedom to believe. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And H.R. 5 is going to directly threaten the first of the first freedom rights. It threatens religious education and any religious program receiving federal financial assistance. This bill allows the Justice Department to aggressively come after private employers if they fail to implement strict preferred pronoun policies. It allows public school counselors to guide children with gender confusion to embrace transgenderism, against what the Bible would have to say about male and female being created beautifully in the image of God. First, this isn't the role of the school. Second, these are kids. I mean, their brains are still developing. Why not at least allow the kid to reach voting age before they're encouraged in their exploration of a sex change that's irreversible? Young teen girls should not be encouraged just to become popular for a fleeting year or two of high school to remove their breasts. Yet that's happening. The result of H.R. 5 is going to be more government oversight into Christian adoption and foster care agencies. All major religions are under attack here. The DOJ, the Department of Justice, very little accountability in that organization, very powerful. They will now have the power to go into any church, synagogue, or mosque and make sure employment practices do not violate their non-binary transgender definition. The 1993 Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which protects religious institutions, is specifically called out in this proposed legislation, and it's killed completely. H.R. 5 is not about equality. It imposes on the entire country their view of sex, gender, and human nature. Anyone who dissents will be subject to legal bullying by the DOJ. Women will lose their right to female-only spaces. A request for a sex reassignment procedure will become mandatory. This is even if the medical professional believes that the procedure contradicts their own best medical judgment or religious beliefs. H.R. 5 doesn't give that kind of flexibility. The bill neuters the Religious Freedom Reformation Act, and it opens the door for unlimited federal funding of abortions. It makes it illegal to decline to perform an abortion. Americans have learned to live together amid deeply held religious and social differences. Yet this so-called Equality Act, unfortunately, forces all Americans, even those with very different religious beliefs about human sexuality, to abide by a worldview that is not Christian. And for Christians and other religions with different worldviews, this law allows the government to enforce its beliefs. So, as it relates to H.R. 5, please let your rep and your senator know. This bill is a hindrance to your success, and it severely limits your freedom. God bless you.
Hi, I'm David Farah. Thank you for listening to my dad's podcast, The Barry Farah Show, Culture Shift. Click subscribe now to be sure you don't miss an episode. Share this podcast with your friends on social media and give The Barry Farah Show your 5-star rating. Check out today's show notes below this episode and at thebarryfarahshow.com. This podcast is also available in video format at The Barry Farah Show on YouTube. See you next time.